Okay, so continuing our exploration of the Brightspace evaluation panel, we've been talking about the use of the preview screen, the document preview on the left-hand side, and making a series of annotations. So we've done those, and now presumably we want to get on with actual grading and feedback, at which point I'm going to use the handlebars here to resize so that I'm looking mostly at my feedback tools. So on the right-hand side of our evaluation panel, in this case, we've got a rubric attached. So this is a scored points-based rubric or a quantitative rubric, which we can open up using this toggle here on the right-hand side. See, we've got the name of each of the criterion with a description, and then if we hover our mouse over the top of each of the criterion areas, I can see the title underneath. In this case, it's been set up with a baseline series of point values appearing over on the right-hand side. And I can select any of those criterion scales. So I'll select a credit for criterion 1. And you'll notice that it has automatically populated that baseline score that went into the rubric for a credit. So when I've set this up, it's been calculated as the top of this particular bracket, so 14.8 out of 20. Up here I can see a total score for the rubric, so it's being marked out of 100, but that's not to say that the task itself that we're marking may have a different weighting. Right now we're just looking at the rubric. So criterion 1, I've put in a credit for this one. Maybe I feel that it might be more of a lower credit level, and I can actually select within the rubric tool and adjust down my values inside this box over here on the right hand side. So if I'm thinking that this is more like 14.2, etc., like you can adjust those values from here. Now the system is not clever enough to know that if I've changed this 14.2 to a value lower than say 12.8, which is the pass top level, it's not going to change where the tick is here. So you do have to stay within your kind of field for which criterion. If you're going to choose a credit and then adjust down, but only slightly if you've set your starting value as that kind of baseline, 14.8 for example. But you can see here for my pass, I've set it up so that it's starting at 12.8 as the top, and then I can adjust that down if I needed to. But if I've adjusted my credit score lower than 12.2 here, it's not going to move where the tick is to the student. So you're probably going to get them asking you, why have you selected credit here, but in fact I got a lower score. So keep that in mind. You do need to stay within the limits of your scale area when you're selecting them. We'll talk more about setting up rubrics in another clip, but for now, if we move on to the next criterion, so criterion 2, I can adjust that if I need to. Maybe that one's more like 24.2. You can see that it is tallying those scores as we go. Underneath each of the criterion in the rubric, you'll notice we have the ability to add criterion level feedback. So this is criterion 1, and I could type feedback in there. You'll find that there's a limit of 3,000 characters that can go into these criterion feedback boxes, so plenty of room for feedback against individual criterion. You have some limited formatting options over here above the box, including the ability to use both the insert stuff function in Brightspace, which is how we get external objects into the feedback, or we could also use the quick link option, and that would allow us at that point to direct the student to other parts of the subject site. So there are lots of different types of feedback that we can drop into these feedback boxes if you're looking to add in feedback beyond text, so to speak. Alright, so I've put in some feedback against criterion 1. Let's go through and select some other scores. It's tallied these as we go. And we can see now the student has scored 76.5 out of 100 as their total rubric score. And if we look underneath we have our overall grade area. So the weighting for this task is 30%, and Brightspace has converted the score for the rubric to the score for the task weighting. So it does that automatically. And then we have our overall feedback underneath, and this will take up to 300,000 characters. So there's a lot of feedback that you can get in to the overall feedback section. So if you'd done that elsewhere, you could copy and paste it in here. You can type it directly into the overall feedback box. Maybe it's text feedback. Maybe you're utilizing some of the other tools available. Again, we have insert stuff available to us if we wanted files embedded. If we wanted to add video or audio notes in here, you can add links to clips, etc. You could use the quick link options. Many different types of feedback that you can put in. Because you have the Brightspace editor here available to you, you'll have an accessibility checker available if you wanted to make sure that the feedback's accessible. We've got a spell checker that's built in, so if you're making spelling mistakes, once we actually try to save this, you'll find that this will underline in red in a minute and tell me that I've made spelling mistakes. Although we do have a preview available to us to show us what the feedback looks like. So, assuming that you've put your feedback that you want in the overall feedback box, if we look underneath, we also have the ability to add file attachments as feedback. So the cloud with the up arrow, if I select that and add a file from my computer, I'll find something. Let's say, doesn't really matter what it is. Let's take this Word document, for example, and add that. You can add multiple documents, doesn't just have to be one file. I've added a couple there, okay. And you'll see that it has added those back, and the student will get those documents as part of their feedback. We also have over here on the right-hand side an audio and video record option, at which point it would utilize either your webcam or your headset to provide feedback, again as an attachment to the feedback received by the student. So those are our grading and feedback options on the right-hand side. And you'll notice when I'm marking here that I have two buttons visible to me. Now I'm the subject convener in this subject site, and I have the ability to publish my feedback as well. But publishing is something we'll talk about in other clips. You don't want to publish until you're ready for students to receive their feedback by default. So most of your marking, and certainly markers that you might oversee, if you're in a role that has oversight of markers, you want them to be saving as draft. And that will either allow them to return to this paper or for you to come in and have a look at the feedback that's been done without it going to the students. That is the default marking setup in Brightspace. The workflow is your markers going through once they've finished marking, adding in a grade, for example, filling out rubrics if there's a rubric involved, and they'll hit Save Draft. And when you're ready for marking to be released to students, we would publish the marked paper. So that is the default position. What I'm going to do now is show you a slight difference in that if you have used one of the advanced evaluation settings in setting up an assignment, and what I'm talking about here is you may have specified when you created this assignment who has publishing rights and who are your evaluators. So we can see against our assignment settings under evaluation and feedback, we have a number of evaluators identified and we have two publishers identified. So at this point, there is a difference in the workflow using the evaluation screen. I want to point out what that looks like to you. So I might actually become one of these markers in just a moment. So I'm now one of the markers in this site, not someone who's able to publish particular assignments, but they can mark. So in this case, Teresa, the marker's going in to the assignment dashboard. I'm going into my portal where I have specified who can publish and who can mark. And I am a marker here. I'm not one of the publishers. So I can see a submission here. When I open up the evaluation screen using those advanced options, what we can see now is a difference in the buttons available down the bottom. Markers in this instance can see Save Draft, which will allow me to come back and revisit this document once my markings, each time I want to make adjustments to my marking, for example, but it is not ready for publishing. When we have those advanced assessment options turned on, specifying who the markers and evaluators are, the markers need to select Ready for Review when they have finished doing their marking. That will then allow the publisher, which is usually the subject convener, to publish everything. At the moment, if you select Save Draft, they're not going to be able to publish because it hasn't been moved to that final part of the workflow prior to publishing. So this is something that is only in place when we have specified who can mark and who can publish. By default, you'll be able to just see Save Draft and the publisher will be able to come in when they're ready and select Publish. So there's a distinction between the default setup for assignments that just use Save Draft and Publish and the advanced setup for assessment when we specify markers and publishers, where we see this new button, Ready for Review. And that's what you need to be directing your markers to. If they can see Ready for Review, that's what they need to select when they finish marking.